Hi, I'm Lisel Crowley, and in the tutorial we're going to do today, I'll show you how to create a beautiful Art Nouveau pendant using a faceted gemstone and some templates that Cool Tools has created that are calibrated for creating bezels for faceted stones. This is the pendant we'll be making today. First, I'm going to show you how to create a bezel for your faceted stone. The first step in this process is to determine the depth of your stone. I've selected this lovely Olivine pear-shaped cubic zirconia. It's a fairly large stone, so it's going to be fairly deep. So I'm going to lay it down, flat side down, and take my thickness frames and set them up. And I've already determined that this stone is so deep that it needs the complete set of thickness frames plus another size 6. And the way I know how deep it needs to be is by running my coil roller over the top of the frames. And if the stone moves, it's not deep enough. If it does not move, it's the perfect depth. So now that I've determined the depth, I'm going to take a lump of clay, and I mean a lump. You want a fairly good sized lump because this is a large stone, and you want to use either fresh clay or freshly reconstituted clay for this part. And I'm going to roll my lump of clay into a ball, place it between my thickness guides, and take my snake roller and just press. And this will make a flat pancake to the depth of the stone. Next, I'm going to take my templates, which are calibrated for stone setting, and determine the proper template for the stone I'm using. This is a 12 by 14 stone, so I'm using the 12 by 14 calibrated template. And I'm going to cut out, first I want to determine that I have a big enough pancake. I actually do, and you'll see once I get my stone in there, it'll open up a bit. So I'm going to cut my inner hole out for the stone. And I'm going to use the clay pick, my absolute favorite metal clay tool in the universe, and I'm going to run it through the SLIK. So you run your pick through the SLIK. And when you cut, you want to cut at an angle. That's going to provide a seat for the culet of your stone. And you pull that clay right out of there. And if there's a little bit of a unevenness in here, you just take a moment to sort of even it out a little. You don't want a lot of extra clay inside there. You want a slight taper, but you don't want a lot of extra clay. And if it looks a little rough at this stage, fear not, because we're going to dry and sand this before we actually use this stone setting. So once you get that cut out, I'm just smoothing that over just a little. You place your stone in, culet side down, bring your snake roller back over, and you press. And that will push that stone just under the surface of the clay, which is right where you want it, because as the piece is firing and the clay shrinks, it's going to grab onto that stone, but because you have a nice hole, it's going to, as the clay shrinks, it's going to push the stone down and back and into the hole rather than up and out of the hole. Now I'm going to take away one of my guides. I'm going to take away the 3-card thick guide and press one more time. And that's going to smooth over the top a bit. And now I'm going to come back in with my wider shape. I'm actually going to take the guides away for this. And I'm going to press that template down into the clay. And that's going to keep the clay from moving as I cut the outer shape of the template, of the setting. I like to go around twice to be on the safe side. Cut away the excess clay. And one of the reasons it's important to work with fresh clay for this is that you want a smooth bezel. You don't want any cracks in it. So this will give you a nice smooth bezel with the fresh clay. Again, bring the guides back. Do one final press. That's just to make sure that nothing was moved around too much when I did the cutting. Now this piece will go in the dehydrator, and once it's dried, I'll sand and refine it and have a perfectly smooth bezel that I can use in my designs. Once your metal clay bezel has been dried, either in the dehydrator or air dried, you want to sand and refine it. And I've pretty much gotten this one where I want it. I'm just going to do a few final touches. I really like a fine grit sanding pad for this. You can also use a sanding stick. And sometimes you can use a file to get into some of the nooks and crannies. It's also good to have a nice fluffy brush to brush away the sanding dust and have a nice clean bezel and a nice shiny stone when you're done. Now I'm going to show you how to create a setting for your beautiful stone in the metal clay bezel using a small amount of clay and the Cool Tools snake roller. So you want, one of the mistakes that a lot of people make when they roll out coils is using too much clay for the size coil that they want. So you don't really need a lot of clay to start. So I'm going to start with about a pea-sized shape, and I'm going to start by rolling the coil out with my finger to get it started, and then I'm going to take the snake roller, which I absolutely love, and just go back and forth and roll out my coil. Now some people have trouble getting their coils thin enough. If that is the case, what you can do is take one of the thickness frames and put it around your clay as you're rolling, and it will keep you from pressing so hard that you flatten your coil out, and you can roll a little harder and get your clay longer faster. And then if you want to taper the ends, you just take the thickness frame away and just very gently roll again, tapering the ends. And if something like that happens, just bring your needle tool in, trim it off, and taper it. And then you can flip it over and taper the other side. Now I've done a relatively fat coil because this is a large piece. If it was a smaller stone, say like this one, I would go with a thinner coil. You want to make your coils proportionate to the size stone that you're setting. So what I like to do is get the rough shape that I'm going to be working with, the rough curve in the coil, and then I take my snake roller and very lightly press along the bottom to flatten that out. Once I do that, I take my brush with water, it doesn't have to be paste, and I'm brushing the entire snake. Now, there's a couple of reasons I'm doing this. One is I'm going to attach it to my stone, but the other is I want to keep my clay nice and supple because I'm going to be forming and shaping it, and if I don't keep that surface nice and moist, I'll get surface cracks. So I'm going to let that water soak in as I place my stone. And I want to just push that stone down against the base of that snake that I've just rolled and flattened. And I'll also run a little more water there. And as I work, by keeping this coil wet, I'm also going to wet underneath. I'm going to keep it nice and flexible, but also having the moisture underneath allows that coil to slide on the surface of the Tuff card, which allows me to shape my clay very easily without any drag. Because if the snake starts to drag, you're going to get gouges or stretches in it. And then I'm just going to curve that top edge. Now this one was slightly longer, so I'm just going to bring in my clay pick and trim that off to make it closer to the same size. And I'm going to bring this around. And again, if it looks like it's stiff or it's starting to dry, I'll just wet it some more. And just coil it around. And it still looks a little bit bigger than this size. If I want to be a perfectionist about it, I can trim it, but I am not that much of a perfectionist. So I'm just going to leave it. And I'm going to also brush the side of the snake closer to the stone so it has good contact. Now this is just one of many designs you can do with snakes and bezel set stones. The next thing I need to do is create another snake to create the bail. Now I'm going to show you how to make a bail and embellishments using another snake of metal clay. So I'm going to take another little ball of clay. Again, remember, you want to use fresh or reconstituted clay for this, and don't take more clay than you need. Start the clay with your fingers and use the snake roller to roll it out. The faster you can get this rolled without rushing, the better, because it allows the clay to stay more flexible. And I do not use the thickness frames, but remember, they are a great tool for this if you need the assistance. I'm tapering my ends quite a bit because those are going to be the embellishments along the side of the piece. Also bear in mind that the clay will shrink 10%, so it can be a little bit thicker than you might want the finished piece to be, but not too much. So once I have my snake rolled, I'm going to pick it up very carefully and place it on my Tuff card with my piece, and I'm going to make a loop in the center of the coil. I don't wet it until I make that loop. Now I'm going to wet the sides, again, to keep them nice and supple and to allow them to slide easily on the Tuff card. And I'm going to bring them to make good contact with my setting. And now I'm going to do a little decorative embellishment. And all I'm doing is making a little wavy line here. I'm using quite a bit of water. And do the same thing on the other side. And one side can be longer than the other. Sometimes I like that asymmetrical look. Or I could trim it. I could bring it close around if I wanted to, but I happen to like the way it looks when it comes out like this. Let's do a little. And I tend to be very intuitive with my designs, so I sort of let the clay kind of tell me what it wants to do. So I'm kind of liking this little piece sticking off the end. I'm going to see if I can curl it around. I've just got to get it nice and wet to let it soften up. I just want to make sure that this is going to be my bail, so I want to make sure that's nice and upright. And again, I want to put extra water right here where these pieces connect. Now that that's gotten wet a little more, I might just bring my clay pick in just to support it as I try to swirl that around and get a nice little finish on that. And the very last thing that I'll do is take a small bit of clay and make some tiny little balls. This is called granulation in metalsmithing, and really just takes a very small amount of clay. I like to work in odd numbers rather than even. I'll roll these little balls. Let me get that one a little more round. And once they're rolled, I'll use my brush to place them where I want them to go. Let's put these three down here. Actually, I want the fatter one next to the coil. And this is, you can do as much or as little of this embellishment as you want, but I find adding these little accents can really make the piece very interesting. After the piece is dried, it is sanded and refined just like any other metal clay project. Then you fire it, polish it. You can apply a patina or leave it satin finish or shiny. And here is the end result. A lovely pendant.
Visit our Learning Center at www.cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channels, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for the email list to be the first to hear about new videos, products, contests, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.